Right, so the best way to get rid of weeds and bugs is by having healthy soil. So your soil, your dirt, whatever you want to call it, is absolutely imperative that it's really good, really fertile, and half your problem with weeds and bugs will disappear. So that's number one. That's my contention. I'm actually going to be writing it. I'm trying to find time to write a book on the subject of soil improvement to get rid of weeds and bugs. So watch this space. It won't be a very big book. It'll be a booklet rather than a book at this stage. But I might develop it when I retire, if I ever retire. Anyway, so we're going to look at weeds first, bugs second, and then watering, because watering is very, very important, especially if we're going to have another summer that we had like last year where we got very, very dry. And the drier your soil, the more your plants are likely to be stressed, like most of us these days who are getting stressed about this, that, and the other. And if they're stressed, the bugs get into them. So that is very, very important. Okay, so we have a picture of a nice weedy patch that looks like mine looked somewhere along the line. But weeds are not all bad. Believe me, a lot of them are edible, for a start. We have a picture of some tent worms up the top there in the middle. It's not a very good picture, but they are a nuisance, but they're not really a nuisance in gardens. They're more of a nuisance on trees. So, but I just put them in for heaven's sake, and I just happen to like that little lady. I think she's just great, so she's going to help us do the watering. So, weeds good and bad. This is an academic treatise. It's called Weeds and What They Tell Us by Ehrenreit Pfeiffer. He's a German. Came out here in the 50s, very much into Rudolf Steiner and the whole holistic growing situation. This book was actually first published in about the 50s, and it's more on agriculture, but it's actually very interesting reading. If you can get hold of a copy, there are copies available on Amazon. And he worked down in the States, but of course that was basically where it was all at the time. He did a doctorate, blood testing for cancer. He was actually a medical doctor before he became an agriculturalist. And he takes a lot of the common weeds that we find and he looks at them and sees what they tell us about our soil. For instance, dandelions will tell us that our soil has got too compacted. So you need to look at the weeds, why they're there. That's one of the main reasons. Anyway, having a look at weeds, edible weeds. Dandelion has enormous amounts of calcium, iron. His name is Pfeiffer, P-F-E-I-F-F-E-R, and his first name is Ehrenfried, E-H-R-E-N-F-R-I-E-D. And the publisher is, and it's called Weeds and What They Tell Us. It's published by Floris Books, F-L-O-R-I-S. And this was published, this is the third edition, published in 2012. And it's all to do with biodynamic farming, basically. So anybody who knows anything about biodynamics, this is, he was one of the sort of pioneers of it. Anyway, dandelions, calcium, iron, and antioxidants. And if you go down to the shops these days, you will find dandelion being sold alongside kale, spinach, and whatever. And dandelion is actually very edible. Don't eat them later on in the season, but early in the season, dandelion leaves make a very nice salad. And dandelion root makes very good tea. Because it's got a long taproot. That taproot absorbs a lot of really good minerals out of the soil. And there's a guy in PEI who earns $180,000 a year exporting dried dandelion root to Japan, where they live on dandelion root tea. So there are uses for dandelions. Purslane, which I'll show you in a moment, has omega-3 and vitamin C in it, specifically. It's a fleshy type of weed, and it's actually quite tasty. Lamb's quarters I have used for years. It's also known as poor man's spinach, and it's related to quinoa, which I didn't know. That was something I learned recently. Red clover is often used as a green manure here in New Brunswick, and it's used medicinally quite extensively. Japanese knotweed, which is an absolute diabolical thing once you have it in your garden, because it just goes down and down and down and along and along and up and up and up, but it's one of the invasive weeds that we have in this province. It tastes very sour rhubarb. So if you think rhubarb's sour, this one's worse, but it is, the young shoots are actually quite edible. Watercress grows wild, but beware, be very careful where you harvest wild watercress, because you don't know what's been in the ditch where it's growing. But it has vitamins A, C, and a lot of folic acid. So there are some very good edible weeds. So let's just have a quick look at them. There's my friend the dandelion, and I have masses of them if anybody wants to come collect any. This is Purslane. It's very low growing. You can tell it's almost like sedum, if you know the flower sedum. It's got a lot of water in the shoots and in the leaves.
Is sedum a native plant?
I don't think it's edible. Not that I know of. There are native sedums, yes. Yeah. And that, you know, they've been made look pretty, but the native sedums do grow. Now, this is lamb's quarters. This is actually the flower head of it. It's best, if you're going to eat lamb's quarters, eat it before it starts flowering. It gets really bitter, and it gets stringy as well. But it'll start growing as of now, and it'll grow. It grows about that height. And, well, I read somewhere it can grow to 10 foot high, and I'm thinking, whoa, I don't want to see lamb's quarters that size, thanks.
Have you ever tried to harvest the seeds, thinking along the lines that it's related to quinoa?
No, I haven't actually, because I've only just recently read that it's related to quinoa. This is red clover. This is wonderful. That and dandelion are brilliant for bees. Did anybody ever take dandelions, these red clovers apart and suck the end of them? They've got nectar. You did? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, as a child. Yes. I think we've all done it. Anyway, they are brilliant for bees. Dandelions, because they're so early in the season, the bees flock to them because there's nothing else. And red clover is just an absolute bee trap, bumblebees especially. They absolutely love it. This is Japanese knotweed, and it is highly invasive. Don't ever try and grow it as a plant. Get rid of it the moment you see it. And it is, I don't know whether you've seen the little new booklet that they've just put out by the Invasive Plant Species group. There's a little booklet, if anybody wants a copy, we have them at work. There are 12 invasive plants that they've actually picked out specifically for New Brunswick, and this is one of them. It's an import, and it's just gone. It's just crazy. I had this in England, and I could not get rid of it. I dug it for 12 years. And if you have one tiny little bit that size left, it'll just go completely berserk and come. And I dug one bed, we dug 6 foot down, and its roots were 6 foot down. And it's a devil once you get it. So don't try getting anywhere near it. But it is edible, so. And watercress, I think most people know because they've bought it occasionally. But it's very nice because it's got that lovely peppery taste, brilliant with salads. So most of these can be used as salads, or they can be used cooked and perfectly edible. But unfortunately, most of them will tell you that your soil is not right. It's either too acid or it is compacted. So, you know, if you've got them, be aware that your soil is, they are telling you that your soil is not right, you need to do something. But we don't have time tonight to go into all the details of each one and what we're looking at. Bad weeds, the truly bad weeds. Number 1, crabgrass. Number 2, poison ivy, poison sumac, and poison oak. All 3, nasty. Prickly lettuce. Well, prickly lettuce, strictly speaking, you can eat, but it grows by seed. It's like a dandelion. It's got a very fluffy seed head, and if it starts taking over, beware. Ragweed, which a lot of people are extremely allergic to. Redroot pigweed. Now that looks like amaranth, so you have to be careful. I've actually got pictures showing you the difference between the two, because amaranth you can eat and it's a nice plant and you can make amaranth flour, but redroot pigweed is not the nicest of animals. Japanese knotweed we've just seen. Canada thistle, which is native to New Brunswick, is invasive as well. And obviously dandelion, once you get that clock and the seeds going, 7 years weeding if you get dandelions really growing. So let's have a look at these guys. That is crabgrass. It's a nuisance because it spreads very easily. And it's quite, because it's got deep roots, it's quite difficult to get out. It's quite pretty. It's got a fairly soft leaf, but it's just a darn nuisance if you don't want grass in your garden. Then the poison ivy, that's a young poison ivy on the left. And then you've got poison oak, poison sumac. Now they all have grey white flowers. That's how you can tell the difference between them. And the sumacs, obviously, normally you see the red sumac with the big red stem that sticks up. But the poison sumac has a little white droopy flower. So does the poison oak, which isn't truly an oak, but anyway, and obviously the poison ivy. So now there is a non-stinging plant that looks like poison ivy. So I couldn't find a picture of it. We've got them on the farm. I thought, oh my goodness, when I first looked at this lot, I thought, we've got poison ivy sort of 100 yards long and 150 yards wide, and I'm thinking, oh no. And I happened to brush up against it. And it didn't sting me. And I thought, okay, what's this? And it turned out to be not poison ivy. So there is a lookalike that isn't truly poison ivy. So that's one good thing. This is prickly lettuce. That is edible. It grows a long stem and it has dandelion-like flowers, but small, little tiny yellow flowers on top. Again, very nice for pollinators, because anything yellow-flowered will bring good pollinators and good beneficial bugs to you. So anything with yellow flowers, plant masses of yellow flowers. That will bring the Tachinid flies, the Parasitoid wasps, the Ecumeon wasps as well. So anything yellow flowered is actually a good thing to have. I'm not an entomologist, so I'm trying to be one. Ragweed versus goldenrod. Now, lots of people think that the plant on the right is ragweed. It's not. That is solidago. That's its Latin term. That is goldenrod, which is grown, well, there are 20 species of goldenrod that grow naturally in New Brunswick. So you'll travel along some of the old homesteads, you'll see that growing. Ragweed is less attractive, it's got less of a yellow flower, but when it flowers, it is highly allergenic to certain people. So beware, if you start sneezing, go look for ragweed. And I gave you the two so that you could see the difference between the two. Redroot, pigweed, and amaranth. Now, amaranth is on the right, and the pigweed is on the left. Amaranth has a very similar flower, except it's a deep red. It's the sort of same color as those leaves. The pigweed is always only green flowered, and it's a really coarse flower, whereas the amaranth isn't as prickly as the pigweed. Pigweed doesn't actually have a prickly stem or anything, but the flowers are pretty prickly. And again, it just seeds and goes berserk. And I tried to give it to the chickens last year, and the chickens just turned up their noses and said, what's that? Forget it. So it grows in the middle of my rhubarb patch. And it's got a long, deep root. But again, those long, deep roots bring all the good nutrients from further down, they bring them back up to the surface. So before that flowers, if you take that out and put it in your compost, you're going to get a lot of nutrients in your compost. So weeds are good compost material so long as they're not flowering and they're not seeding. Canada thistle. I'm sure everybody's seen that one somewhere around the place. There are plenty of them. I didn't put in the purple loosestrife, which has the same color head as that, but of course the loosestrife is a long, thin purple plant. That has become extremely invasive. And each purple loosestrife plant produces 600 plus seeds. So it's just all from White's Cove right through Waterborough down to Young's Cove. When we first got there 5 years ago, there wasn't any. Now it's just, every ditch is full of it. Okay, so when to weed. 10 days before planting. Dig deeply and get everything out. and turn your soil over so that you get another flush of those weeds, because they germinate very quickly generally, so that 2 days before planting, you can take the next lot out. Then plant your plants, water them in well, we'll come to that in a minute, and 10 days after planting, weed again. Use a hoe or one of these. If you've got a small plot, these are the most wonderful weeders ever. That little thing, it scratches. It's very good as back scratcher too when you've got mosquito bites, right? So that is a very, very good little tool, especially if you've got a small plot. They're available most of the places. I've seen them for definite at the Co-op Country Store. Don't think I've seen them at Sugargane, but you know, most of the places have them. There's a 2-tine one and a 3-tine one, and it's really good. Otherwise, you've got to either get your big hoe out, or you've got to get a fork out and dig them down and whatever. This doesn't dig deep. That's the only problem with these. They dig, you know, they scratch across the surface, but they're good for taking out little weeds. After that, and I'm finding that this is happening more and more and more, people tend to not weed as diligently as they used to, because most of us don't have the time. Unless your plants are getting really crowded by the weeds. Weeds are forming a mulch for you, so they are actually keeping the soil cool and wet. So don't just go and pull every weed out and leave bare soil. It's better to have a small mat of weeds than to have bare soil. So it depends, again, obviously on the type of crop that you're trying to grow and the type of weed that you're growing, because you don't want pigweed, you don't want the really big weeds crowding out your radishes or your lettuces or whatever. So, you know, use a bit of judgment, but even the commercial farmers these days are just leaving their weeds between the rows as a mulch, and then they dig them in at the end of the year. Fall weeding, it's a very good idea to do some really good clearing up before the first frost. Take it away, put it on your heap, your compost heap or whatever, or if it's bad weed, get rid of it, dump it in the garbage. Clear off all your weeds and clear off most of your whatever in your plots in the fall, because A, you're going to stop any weed seed growing again next year. B, you're going to stop any bugs overwintering in those plants that you've left. So it's a good thing to clear. You know, it's like tidying up, having a spring clean in your kitchen this time of year. And spring weeding, don't weed before the ground dries out, because if you walk on really wet ground, you're going to compact it and your plants aren't going to grow as well. So don't start weeding until that ground is really not soggy anymore. I've been very tempted to go out and weed when I'm thinking, no, whoa, it's not dry enough yet, because I don't want to walk on that soil and plate it down and compact it. So I hope that's of some use to you, because that's from experience and also from reading a lot of stuff about weeding recently. All right, green manure stops weeds. If you grow cover crops, green manure, it stops weeds. And the best ones for this area are buckwheat in the summer and fall. So if you've used a certain patch and you don't want to use it again that season, because you've got your crop rotation going that it's going to lie fallow, it's not going to be used, use buckwheat. Right, we're going to pass these around so that you can see what they are. And it cost, that little bag, that bag amount cost me 41 cents. So buckwheat's not exactly expensive. It's very good for pollinators. It's got a very sweet scented white flower. You can make flour out of it. In fact, there's a person who does buckwheat pillows down near the Gemseg Ferry and Spearville Mills use buckwheat for their, they do a buckwheat flour. It's slightly grainy, but it's gluten-free, so it's wonderful in that sense. So it's a good cooking flour. Right? Then in winter wheat or rye. Now, winter wheat will not survive here. British Zone 7, it does survive. It lasts right through the winter. But winter wheat and rye are very good in fall, and then what you do is you basically just dig the roots. They die back and you dig the roots in and leave the roots in the ground, because add to your mulch and to your compost. So that's rye. Then early in the spring, I plant oats. Not only because I happen to have 2 dogs who think that they are cows and they eat oats. The moment it comes up, they're there grazing away like a pair of cows, but my chickens love it too. So that is very useful. Again, what you do is you mow off the top or cut off the top, leave the roots in. The roots give you a lot of good nutrient material. And then obviously clover, I haven't got any clover seed here unfortunately. Legumes, that's beans, peas, fava beans, things like that. Plant those in the spring and they will help your soil fix nitrogen. It's a whole bacterial process and they're very useful. This is alfalfa. This is processed alfalfa. And this is what everybody's been informing about recently in terms of GM, because they're trying to bring in GM alfalfa here. And the local farmers, the National Farmers Union are saying, no, we can't afford to have that come in here. This is the bigger blocks. What I do is I buy this and I put it in a bucket, a lot of it in a bucket, get it really wet, add some compost to it, make a compost tea. This is high nitrogen. So if you need something that needs a high nitrogen feed, that's what you use. So you can buy it, the only trouble is you buy sort of 25 kilos at a time. It takes about 2 years to use. You can buy smaller packs if you go to the pet stores. You can buy alfalfa pellet in this form, in that form, which is actually used for rabbit food or guinea pig food. Again, this will melt down if you put it in water, and it makes a very, very good, very high nitrogen compost tea. So that's alfalfa, and it's worked for me. It grows, it looks a little bit like red clover, but it doesn't have as pretty a flower as red clover. It's the same sort of family. Clover and legumes plant in the spring. You can actually plant them, again, you can plant peas and beans, well, peas at the end of summer, but not to get a pea crop, but just to get the goodness out of the ground. Okay, right, moving on to bugs, because we're running, I'm sort of allowing half a session, half an hour per item here. My favorites, the cucumber beetles, the Colorado potato beetle, decimated my potato crop last year and got into the eggplants and the tomatoes. Flea beetles, slugs, I wage constant war against slugs, but I've learned some things about slugs recently. Aphids, tomato hornworm, and cutworms. Cutworms are nasty beasts. So let's have a look at each of these little fellas. That is the favorite. Why the Americans ever sent the Colorado potato beetle to us, I don't know, but they did. And this is on the right is the male, is the adult, and it's the babies that do most of the damage, because this one can lay up to 200 in a week. 200 eggs. And they're in little clusters underneath the leaf. Look for little orange clusters, and you know you've got Colorado potato beetle. The only way to get rid of them, and I've tried a lot of things, well, there are 2 ways to get rid of them. Karen Davidge tells me, and she's a potato farmer, and she's a specialist in potatoes. They do seed potatoes. Hoops and very tight cloth, horticultural fleece, right? I said, well, they come up out of the ground, so then they have an absolute feast inside the horticultural fleece. So she said, well, then you've got a problem. The other is to literally pick them off, one after the other, 3 times a day if you've got time. I haven't, because I work 5 days a week, and literally go out, time and time and time again and pick them off and drown them, because that's the only way, or squish them. I don't particularly like squishing them, so I just pick them up and shove them in a pot and drown them. Drown, best way to drown things is dishwashing liquid. Drowns anything and kills anything. So, thank you. That's wonderful, thanks. So that is one of, now Colorado potato beetle is not just potatoes, it's tomatoes, it's any of the Solanaceae family, tomatoes, tomatillos, eggplant, it will go for most of those things. So it's just not just potatoes, and that is a nasty beast. And even the commercial farmers are finding this one really difficult to kill because they've used up all the options to actually kill it off now, using all their horrible pesticides. Cucumber beetle. Comes up out of the ground, stripy little devil, and that will make a lace out of your cucumber leaves. You've got this wonderful little cucumber plant that you've planted out, and oh boy, you come out the next day and you've just got little bits of lace left. This is your culprit. He's a pain in the I don't know what. He will also go for corn when it's very young, so be careful with him. He's not a very nice little gentleman. This table will give you quite a lot of the information. Basically, I'm not going to repeat it now, but it's on there. It gives you also the crops, the main crops that they'll go for, the secondary crops that they will go for. A trap crop is a crop that you grow to actually get these beasts to move over to that one and just decimate it there rather than going for your top crops, the ones that you really want to grow. There are mechanical or other means of reduction and organic pesticides that you can use. So basically that's quite a useful little sheet that I've put together. So that's the cucumber beetle. Then you get the flea beetle. Now, flea beetles you can barely see. They are tiny. This is a hugely magnified photograph. But you can see the damage. That's a cabbage leaf. And they tend to get into all the brassica families. So cabbages, cauliflowers, kale, broccoli. And they will make holes, little sort of pinprick holes in the leaves. And where they've started, of course, then you get the fungi going into those little holes that you've made, and bok choy, pak choy, all those they will go for as well. So they are more of an unsightly nuisance value than an actually really destructive force. Then my favorites. I don't know where they come from. They just appear. The moment I start transplanting at the end of May, the slugs are there, in force. Absolutely in force. Right, so slugs. I have found these things work. Beer, but I am a Scrooge. I don't put beer down. I use a yeast mix instead, and you'll find that on the sheet as well. Yeast and sugar is basically what beer is all about, apart from a bit of hops and a bit of flavouring. So, yeast, sugar, and water. There's bug spray. Have I put the slug spray? Yes, it's on the back. Now, somebody told me that ammonia, 1 part of ammonia to 10 parts of water. I've never tried it, so I don't know. I'll probably try it this year. Slugs don't like salt. If you tip salt onto slugs, they sort of froth up and bleh. Yes, fine. But don't forget, salt also kills plants. So use with discretion, great discretion. Okay, so beer you can use. Yeast, 1 tablespoon of yeast, it gets quite expensive. 3 tablespoons of sugar in 1 liter of water. But it froths up. You put it into the 500 milliliter yogurt containers, sink them to almost level with the ground, into the ground, and the slugs come along and say, oh boy, something smells good here. They slide in and they can't get out again. Don't use the little cottage cheese containers because quite often they'll get out again. So get a good deep container. And I'm afraid our chickens like slug, well, yeast-flavored slug. good protein value for you, but anyway. So, but not tell people I supply eggs to, had I? They do. Yeah, I normally put about, if my hand is a yogurt container, I normally put about 1/3 in. Yeah, because it does, a litre of water goes quite a long way. Yeah, because I've got about a half acre of vegetables, so I go right around the perimeter. The other, you can use cornmeal as well, and that's comparatively cheap. You can buy that at Atlantic Superstore. And a bit of molasses, a bit of yeast, and a bit of water, and a bit of flour. Mix that well. You make a paste of it and put it out, and they climb in. What happens is that the cornmeal actually gums up their insides and they die. So, but the trouble with that one is that you find quite a lot of nice ground beetles, which are good beetles, will actually get into that as well. And, you know, you have to be a little bit careful about killing the wrong type of bug. So that's slugs. Snails are the same. What we need to do is import giant African snails. They are about that big, and they're carnivorous. They eat slugs and small snails. So, you know, they're wonderful. But they wouldn't last in this climate. They couldn't. Actually, people keep them as pets down in the States. Actually keep them as pets. And I think, yeah, well, don't think I particularly like, my son has a snake, and that's bad enough. I don't think I want slugs and snails as pets. Thank you. Aphids, the sapsuckers. These are bad for plants, and they're also a sign that your plants are not healthy. Fava beans. If you grow fava beans, you'll find that the first thing that happens is you get black aphid. Those people who like fava beans put up with it, but it is a problem. Green aphid tends to go for a lot of plants, and it tends to go for roses. So if you're growing roses, you'll find aphids all over them if you're not careful. And of course, there's a picture of an ant there as well. There's an ant at the top. Ants farm aphids. They actually milk them. They take they exude a sort of sweet, sticky sort of thing, and the ants love this. And they will actually go and farm these little aphids, and they will go and sort of stroke them and take the sweet, sticky stuff off them, and then go and feed their own progeny with them. So where you find aphids, you find ants. So it's a symbiotic relationship, and it's not a particularly good relationship. A good squirt with a really powerful hose will knock aphids off a plant. And they don't come back too easily because they're very, very soft bodies. But there's also a wasp, and I'll show you some pictures later of a wasp that actually lays its eggs inside the aphid's body. And it's absolutely revolting, but it works. But the trouble is, you've normally got more aphids than you've got wasps, which is the problem. No, they feed them. They feed off them. And then this fella, he likes tomatoes. This is the tomato hornworm. You very seldom see the moth. It's a nighttime moth. It's a very beautiful moth, actually. And it's quite big. It's sort of 2.5 inches in diameter. Yeah. But they're very, very pretty, these worms as well, because they've got the nice little tail, and that's the front end of it, and that's the back end of it, by the way. But, oh boy, are they destructive. So when you get that lot, you have to be pretty careful. But again, there's a wasp that will come and lay eggs on them, and they then get eaten, the worm gets eaten up by the larvae as they develop. Pretty horrible, but still, it works. And this is my pet hate. Corn. This fellow will go for corn in a big way. Cutworms. Corn, beans, peas, anything that's got a sweet stem. This guy will come along, and he'll come underneath at night, and the next morning you'll find the plants just lying on its side, eaten off. And you won't see anything, because this guy's gone back underground overnight, because he doesn't like the sun. There's a white version of it, there's a brown version of it, and there's a grey version of it. They're all a moth as well, all three different types of moth. But they can be extremely destructive. Best way to sort that out, get a toilet roll inside the cardboard from the inside, and when you plant your little plants out, just circle them with that and push it quite deep in. Because these guys, they sort of eat, their eating point is about 1/2 inch deep in the soil, 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep in the soil. So if you've got some sort of collar around your little plants, they can't get at the plants, and they'll go away. Yeah, so that's quite a useful way of doing it. So I tend to cut the toilet roll insides in half and then use half at a time. Especially, as I say, with corn and with beans. And not so, well, anything that's got a stalk, they tend to go for. And a sweet stalk at that. So that's your problem with Mr. Cutworm. And again, if you find them, if you find that if they've been eaten off, just dig around, literally 1/2 inch deep, and you'll probably find them and just get rid of them one way or another. But if you go out early in the morning, the next morning.
I found that if you use crushed eggshells,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, they don't like it either. No, it's the same with slugs. Slugs don't like anything rough to travel over. So you can use things like roof shingles to stop, if anybody's got any old roof shingles lying around. Diatomaceous earth is another thing, but it's so expensive, that's the problem. That is crushed shells of little sea creatures. And that's brilliant for both these and slugs, but it is very expensive. Sort of, $20 for a pack of about 2 kilos. So again, I'm doing quantity, so I have to deal with these things. Okay, the good bugs. We have some brilliant bugs who help us. Honeybees, solitary bees, bumblebees, tachinid flies. Yeah. Ground beetles, and there are lots of different types of ground beetles. There are about 2,000 species of ground beetle in North America. So I could only put 2 on the photographs. Lacewing, which we'll look at in a moment, ladybugs, parasitoid wasps, Aphidus wasps, and there's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful website called whatsthatbug.com. And it gives you descriptions of them, it gives you the life cycle of each one, and it gives you how to get rid of most of them as well. It's got the good bugs and the bad bugs on the same site. And these 2 little books are pretty good. This is from St. Lynn's Press down in Pittsburgh. Tag off that one. We've got good bug and bad bug, and she's picked out sort of 14 of the best bugs and 14 of the bad bugs, and has a whole sort of series of pictures and what they are and what they do and what you can do about them and how to get rid of them. And we've got the companion one, which is good weed and bad weed. And there's some quite nice recipes in the back of this about using some of those edible weeds that I told you about. Right, bees. So we've got your ordinary honeybee. We've got, I think it's 200 species of bumblebee in New Brunswick. So anything sort of ranging from about that size to almost that size. But the one that you normally see is the tri-banded one, which is the one up on the right. They'll be out by mid-May, probably. They're very, very early. And they love heather and ling. If you've got heather or ling available for those guys, they are there in hordes. And then the little guy at the bottom, he looks like a sort of bit of a weird bee, but he's actually the blue orchard bee. Now, there's been quite a lot written about them recently because they are becoming less and less visible. A lot of people actually put up bee nests for them because they nest in blocks of wood. You can make an easy bee. They are solitary, and if it's too early for the honeybees to pollinate the orchards, it's these guys who actually do the pollination work. They are fantastic. So they're your early apples, your early plums, your early pears. They are the guys who will actually pollinate, rather than the honeybees which follow on later. So they're very important to our economy, but they are definitely a species that's being very, very badly affected by things like the pesticide called glyphosate, which is based on DDT. If anybody remembers DDT back in the 50s, the wonder pesticide that killed mosquitoes and killed this and killed that and killed us. Yes, definitely. Thank you. Brilliant. But we only found that out 50 years later. Then from DDT, there became a derivative called 2,4-D, which had only got banned about 10 years ago here. And now they've got this stuff called glyphosate, which is, its trade name is called Roundup. And it's a weed killer. Yeah. That is really, really dangerous. Don't use it, for goodness sake. It's terrible. We're still trying to work out the exact constituent in it that is causing cancers. Yeah. DDT has now been linked to a lot of cancers. And people who used to work out in the fields in agriculture anywhere in the world in the 50s are now coming up with these cancers, and they've found a direct link to DDT, and its derivatives. And glyphosate is still used aerially in spraying. NB Power, where they've got these big, big, big power lines that they've put through, where you've got all those cleared areas underneath them, they are still spraying glyphosate. So it's not a happy situation, and it's something that should be banned completely, but they don't. Tachinid fly looks like an ordinary fly. He's a nice guy. He kills all sorts of nasties, including aphids. But he's got a hairy bottom. That's the difference between an ordinary fly and a tachinid fly, is if you look at his hindquarters, he's got sticky bits sticking out. That's him.
Some magnifying glasses too.
Pretty well, yes. I try to sort of broaden out these things, yeah. But he's got very brown eyes, whereas most flies have either black or bluish eyes. So that's also another thing that will help you find him. Black and other ground beetles, these are two of the most common beetles that I've seen around here. That green beetle's gorgeous. He's green and blue and luminescent. He's just a lovely chappy. And he goes around killing lots of nasties. So they are very useful. But they tend to hide under straw and things like that, like spiders. So people tend to sort of, take the straw away, your mulches away, and you lose these guys. And they are very, very useful. So try and mulch as much as possible because you're going to have some goodies in your mulches. Lacewings. There's a green version of this and a brown version of it. They're both extremely good. They are voracious eaters of mosquito larvae. Yes! We've got a big pond and we've got mosquitoes. Aphids. So they're really, really great. And I often have them, that they sort of float around with the dragonflies because we've got dragonflies around the pond as well, and they tend to come around. And they will actually come and sit on me while I'm working. They're really nice. I'm very pleased to see them. Ladybugs. Now, we've got two types of ladybug at the moment. We've got the little spotty job that everybody knows. And you've got the other one, unfortunately that photograph's not very clear, the more orange one that comes into the house in winter. That is a Japanese import. And he's not as good as the red one. So just be aware that sometimes the orange one will actually be a bit of a damaging situation, whereas the red ones are really good. And I'll show you a picture later on, something I completely forgot and somebody mentioned to me today. You might get a sort of miscasting of a ladybug versus the lily beetle, the Asian lily beetle. So I've put a picture right at the end, just shot him in so that you can see the difference between the two. Because the lily beetles are not good. Parasitoid wasps. So there's your tomato hornworm with a whole lot of eggs. So those eggs will hatch and they will eat the hornworm. So that's, and it's all one of these little wasps. There are 4 or 5 different types of wasp, and they lay their eggs on top of the caterpillar, and then as the eggs develop, they will actually eat into and destroy the caterpillars. So as I say, there are quite a few of them. But they are absolutely brilliant. They're only tiny though. They're not, they're not like the big yellow jackets that we get. The big yellow jacket wasp. They're very small. And the Aphidus wasp, this has actually been farmed now in Europe because they use them in greenhouses to kill aphids, because a lot of greenhouses really suffer with aphids. And the Aphidus wasp is specifically grown for that purpose. So the wasp will curl itself round and it will stick its abdomen into an aphid. 10 weeks later, the aphid actually swells up. You'll see that they're much bigger. They swell up because that larvae inside has developed, and it's basically killing the aphid from inside out, which is really horrible. It's gross. And it'll suddenly pop, and out pops the new baby Aphidus wasp. So yeah, yes. And that's midsummer. That's at 21 degrees. So, but the thing is, the poor old wasp, it can only sting about a couple of hundred aphids a day, and most of us have a couple of thousand. So they're a good help, but they don't take over completely, unfortunately. But it's another way, rather than using Bacillus thuringiensis, they use these wasps instead. So yeah. Okay, so that's that third done. Yeah, we're doing quite well on time. Sorry, I'm just racing through because there's just so much to go through. Watering. Too much water, too little water, leaching, powdery mildew, sun scorch, all sorts of things related to water. So your top picture there is somebody who's watered too much, and the bottom picture is somebody who's watered too little. So we have problems with watering. And if you water heat of the day, don't forget water is like glass. If you get the droplets and you get the sun shining through that water, it's going to scorch your plants, and that's why I put that picture up. It's actually going to scorch your plants. It's going to be like reflecting straight through glass. And you know, if you're sitting in a car and you've got the sun coming at you, you get very hot in a car. Well, that's exactly what's happening to your plant. So don't water midday. Water in the morning or the evening. Morning preferable. I'll explain that why in a minute. So when, where, and how. Early morning or late afternoon is your best time to water, because if you do it early morning, the plants have time to actually absorb that water during the day and then grow. If you water late in the afternoon, that's not too bad, but it means that overnight your plants are still wet. And if it's one of those very humid sections in the summer, you could get funguses really going rampant. So it's better to water if you can early in the morning. Get up at 5. It's wonderful outside at 5 o'clock in the morning. Try not to water on leaves unless you are using a foliar spray where you're fertilizing. Something like Gardener's Dream, where you're actually fertilizing through the leaves. Try to go to the base of the plant and water around the base of the plant rather than watering the leaves as such. Make a little scoopy basin around your plant so that you're not going to just have all the water running away from your plant. Just bring it, but try not to make it too deep, because you might cause your stem to rot if the water stays there any length of time. Dig in pop bottles, or these sort of bottles. Basically, what you do is you get a knife and you put a whole lot of slits. You can use any size pop bottle. You know, it depends. I use these. I put 5 big tomato plants around one of these, and then I just fill it every day, and it soaks out into the ground. And I can also, if I want to do a feed, a liquid feed, then I just pop it in the top. I take the lid off. Well, I don't use the lids at all, but I put the water through in there. If you can't afford soaker hoses, this is the next best thing. So, you know, put a series of plants around one of these, and you can use these, and it saves water, and it also goes in directly into the roots, which is a good thing. So, soaker hoses. Now, it's better to to water an inch a week, once a week, rather than a whole lot of little bits of water every day. Because what you're going to do is, that is going to soak straight down, right down the roots. And it's going to draw the roots downwards, and they're going to grow better. If you water regularly, but only a little bit, your roots are going to come up to the surface. They're not going to grow good and strong, and they are going to come up, and they're going to get very, very hot, and your plants are going to wilt. So it's much better to water one big chunk of water once a week rather than small amounts of water per day. But obviously, if your plants are starting to wilt, for goodness sake, do water in between, because you've got to not have them stressed. So this is a soaker hose. They are about $7.95 plus tax. They're 20 foot long, and they just fit into an ordinary garden hose attachment. And they've got a stopper on the end. And what I do is I tend to lay these out and sort of half dig them in, up and down my beds in the spring, so that they're there for the summer. And you know, people have got 20 hoses off one sort of. You can buy through Lee Valley. You can buy the whole kit, and you can get all your hoses laid off. But you know, they're as I say, they're reasonably expensive. They last about 4 or 5 years. Some of them have got a 7-year guarantee on them. I haven't used them for 7 years to see whether they will last that length of time. The only problem with them is if you're digging or you're trying to weed, and you put a fork through it, you've got a problem. And they're not very thick-walled, so you know, you have to be a bit careful with them. But they are a wonderful thing to have. Okay, and that's the little Asian lily beetle. So yeah, watering, I haven't got it right, because I still find that my plants get stressed. but it's best not to stress your plants if you can help it. So if you've got a really, really dry patch, my husband looked at me yesterday and I said, what am I going to tell people about watering? He said, you can always bring a plant back if it's underwatered. You can't if it's overwatered. It'll just go rotten and it'll just become a glutinous, nasty mass. So you can always bring a plant back if you underwater it, but you can't if you've overwatered it. Especially seedlings, because it's time to plant your seedlings now. So it's time to put your tomatoes in, it's time to start your eggplants, your melons, your whatever. But if you're planting them inside, don't overwater them. Because A, you'll get damping off disease, which is that nasty little grey mold that goes around. B, they'll just go flop and they won't grow nicely. But it's that fine line between drying out totally and flopping because they're not getting any nutrients at all, and overwatering where they're just going to die on you. They're going to flop over and die. So, yeah. So, now transplanting. While we're on the subject, because obviously we're not going to be able to talk about this later on because there isn't a session for it. When we get to transplanting, your last frost date here is round about May the 22nd. So you can start transplanting certain things if the soil is dry enough. There was one year, the first year that this garden was going, we didn't even manage to get on the ground until the end of June, because it was so wet and so soggy. It depends also whether you've got clay soil or sandy soil or whatever. But you can transplant most of your brassica crops, in other words, your kales, your Brussels sprouts, cauliflowers, cabbages and that sort of thing, a week before final frost. So in other words, the middle of May. But I wouldn't transplant any of the tropical crops, in other words, your tomatoes, your eggplants, your peppers, that sort of thing. I wouldn't start until mid-June, because it looks like this is going to be a fairly slow spring, so you're not going to get very heated up soils very quickly this year. It's not like last year where we had that blast of really hot weather and then it went cold. So transplanting, there are a couple of little things. Make sure that you've make sure that you've hardened off your plants to start with. So if you've been pampering them inside in a nice environment where it's been constantly warm, constantly light, no wind, no dips in temperature, you've got to take them outside and get them used to being outside, where you've got wind, which is very, very drying. You know how your skin gets really dry in wind if you're out skiing or snowshoeing or whatever? Well, you're doing the same to plants. Right, wind is a major factor. Light is very different from having this sort of light to having full sunlight blasting at you. Water, obviously, is going to make a big difference as well. So what you're going to do, anything from sort of 1 to 2 weeks, you're going to be hardening off. So you're going to take them outside in the morning before you go to work, drop them off, say, right, nice little plants, put them in semi-shade or where you get some shade and some sun during the day. Evening, take them back inside because it's going to be possibly still too cold for transplanting. Okay? For about 2 weeks, and then finally you come to transplant day. Transplant day should be a cool day. It should be a grey day. It shouldn't be a windy day. We wish, but anyway, it doesn't always work out that way. But water your plants the day you're going to transplant them. Water them thoroughly in the pots that you've still got them in. Water the hole that you're going to transplant them into thoroughly. Quick way to stop them getting transplant shock, which is actually quite a major factor, is to put a little bit of sugar in the water that you're watering your holes with. Because sugar is carbon. Carbon is good food for them. Also, a little bit of rolled oats in the bottom of the hole, which is another food for them for later on. And also a little bit of Epsom salts. But be sure to put a little bit of soil between the Epsom salts and where the root ball is actually going to go, because it might burn it otherwise. Okay? Otherwise, just dilute your Epsom salts with your sugar water. Epsom salts is magnesium. Magnesium allows plants to take up the natural calcium in the soil, which makes them grow strong and grow big roots, big stems and big leaves. So calcium is, in the moment you see that your plants are going yellowish, especially in the lower leaves, it's called chlorosis, and that is a sign that there's not enough magnesium, not enough calcium. So go and buy a huge bag of Epsom salts up at Bulk Barn. It costs you 24 cents for 100 grams. And the mix there would be roughly 2 tablespoons to a litre of water, and use it as a fertilizer. It's brilliant, and it's wonderful for roses. And banana skins and magnesium for roses. Absolutely brilliant. So your transplant whole has got in it, it's got your oats, it's got the magnesium. You put your root bowl in. Now, if you've got a peat pot, slit the peat pot down the sides so that the roots can actually grow out of that peat pot, because I tend to find that the peat pots are actually quite strong, unless you've got a really strong rooted plant. The roots aren't going to come through, and you're going to have just that area that was the peat pot. So slit it down one side, open it up, and the roots will grow out of it. They will still use the biodegradableness of the peat pot, so that's quite useful. Firm your plants in, don't leave them just sort of hanging in the air. Firm them in quite firmly, because you don't want a massive air mass around the roots. The roots have got to come straight into contact with the soil when you're actually planting them out. So they need to be fairly firmed in. If you're planting tomatoes, actually plant the stem as far as the first set of real leaves right into the ground, because that actually is in itself a rooting section, and that will give you a much more grounded tomato that will grow more strongly, because all those little white things that you see on the edge of a stem, a tomato stem at the bottom, are actually what's called adventitious roots, and they will grow as roots if you put them in the soil. So plant it well down. It sounds crazy, and if they fall over and start sort of growing sideways and then coming back up, cover that where you see those little white sticky bits coming out of the stems, cover that with soil, and you'll find that will root the tomato much better. So that's, and what else have we got? It's mid-May, you can start planting things like your onion sets. So if you're going to go and buy onions, you haven't grown the seed, which is too much for business for me. I go and buy onion sets. You could probably start those in mid-May. Peas, beets, carrots, all those things you can start actually just before the last frost, so long as your garden is workable, so long as your soil is workable, because they don't mind. They would rather grow in the cool section of the year. Chard is another thing. You should start your spinach a bit later than that. Corn, beans, bok choy, the choy family, don't plant until the soil is really warm. If you try planting them early, they'll just rot in the soil. It's not worth it. Wait until the soil is really warm. That's sort of mid-June. Also, the later you plant things like corn, the less you'll have in the way of problems with bugs and things like cutworms, because they'll be pretty well gone. Because each of these has a season, and the seasons tend to be fairly early in the year. So, you can plant potatoes quite early as well. Well, there are two theories. One is if you plant your potatoes early, you'll get all the problems with Colorado potato beetle. If you plant them later, then you'll have a later harvest, but you'll also have less bug problems with potatoes. Late would be towards the end of June, so long as you haven't got a frost pocket at the end of the season, where you're going to be planting, where you're going to be harvesting way into the frost. Yeah, and it also depends on how warm your soil is. That's the situation. You need to sort of look at your soil. If it's a very light-coloured soil, it's going to warm up slowly. If it's a dark soil, it's going to warm up much quicker. And there's another trick to weeds. Clear plastic. At this time of year, put some clear plastic over where you're going to plant. It'll bring the weeds up quickly, and they will die, because we've got the same situation with clear plastic as we have with the water droplet on the leaf. The sun will scald through that plastic and it'll kill your weeds off for you. And if you're breaking a new piece of ground in, for instance, if you've got a piece of grass that you want to make into a bed, put black plastic down now. And that will kill off the grass, and you'll be able to lift it up. You'll be able to lift the sod out much quicker, and then just fill in with another topsoil on top. And there you have. And potatoes are particularly good for actually growing as a first crop after you've taken out grass, because they break up the soil for you quite nicely.